Welcome to today's explainer. We constantly hear that Web3, crypto, and blockchain are completely democratizing the internet. But are they really? Or are we just reproducing the exact same old inequalities, just dressed up in new algorithmic guises? Today, we're cutting straight past the hype to look at the hard data and the actual social structures running behind the code. Let's dive right in by anchoring our exploration in Richard Nelson's famous 1977 paradox. It brilliantly highlights the intense friction between incredible technical innovation and stubborn, persistent social exclusion. Now, Nelson was originally talking about the space race, but as you'll see today, his question is perfectly calibrated for our modern digital era. The big question is, can we achieve technological miracles without leaving actual human beings behind? So just to make sure we're all on the exact same page, this is what proponents actually mean when they talk about Web3 platformization. It's a whole mix of things: blockchain, decentralized finance, or DeFi, and distributed ledgers. Promoters tout this as the dawn of collective self-determination, a real way to reclaim our digital infrastructure from those massive tech monopolies. And honestly, it's an incredibly compelling promise. Here is how we're going to break this all down today. First, the moon and the ghetto. Then we'll uncover the illusion of decentralization, compare the global north versus global south, look at three visions of sovereignty, and finally, designing true democratic resilience. Part 1. The moon and the ghetto. This metaphor brilliantly illustrates that without the right institutional and political conditions in place, simply creating a distributed ledger doesn't automatically empower everyday users, and it certainly doesn't dismantle monopolies. We've essentially engineered the equivalent of a lunar landing with cryptographic consensus and automated global coordination, which is amazing, but the persistent lack of access, the digital divides, and the wealth-weighted gatekeeping, well, those are our new digital ghettos. Part 2. The illusion of decentralization. It's time to separate the myth from reality. Because when you look at the actual empirical data from major decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, you get a very different story from the marketing brochures. Across highly capitalized systems like MakerDAO, Aave, and Polkadot, routine voter turnout consistently sits in the single digits. We're talking well under 10%. This completely bursts the bubble that these platforms are perfectly democratic. A ledger distributed across thousands of computers might be technologically decentralized, but if only a tiny, tiny fraction of people are actually making the decisions, governance is effectively centralized. And that myth of decentralization is completely crushed when we look at Uniswap, a massive decentralized exchange. Just 5 wallets, literally just 5, hold over 50% of the voting power. So what does this all mean? It means this isn't a democracy. It effectively functions like a plutocracy where wealth absolutely dictates influence. Look at these dismal voter turnout numbers across Ethereum, MakerDAO, and Uniswap. They prove that participation in this so-called hierarchy-free Web3 space is heavily gated. It's gated by technical literacy, available time, and of course, financial capital. Early adopters and folks with massive resources end up consolidating power, and that leaves the wider community completely excluded from having any meaningful influence on the protocol's direction. Part 3. Global North versus Global South. To really ground this theory in human realities, we have to look at the geographies of Web3 to see how this technology behaves completely differently depending on where it lands, and the contrast is stark. While Silicon Valley ecosystems suffer from elite decentralization and hyper-concentrated token voting, places like Kenya or Latin America face basic infrastructural exclusions. We're talking about intermittent connectivity, wild currency volatility, and device fragility. The exact same technology yields vastly different social outcomes depending on the local environment. The data here is super revealing. Take grassroots economics in Kenya. They have 40,000 users and actually lack a formal token voting architecture, yet their localized governance yields nearly triple the participation rate of major northern DAOs like Ethereum. How is that even possible? Well, it relies heavily on local anchors, things like co-ops, schools, and clinics, rather than just blindly trusting the code. It turns out human intermediaries are totally indispensable for true inclusion. Part 4. 3 Visions of Sovereignty. As these platforms grow, they're creating post-Westphalian models, which is essentially a fancy way of saying they are inventing new ways of defining borders, citizenship, and power entirely outside of our traditional nation-states. But each of these 3 visions carries unique risks. First, the network state is basically an elite venture capital enclave where you essentially just buy your citizenship. Then, network sovereignties aim for cooperative participation, but they risk massive local fragmentation and coordination overload. And finally, algorithmic nations. While they aim for cultural inclusion, they can actually end up trapping the digitally excluded in new ghettos if people don't have the devices or literacy to participate. So how do we solve these risks? Well, we can turn to the theoretical heroes of our explainer today, Karl Polanyi and Elinor Ostrom. Their concepts offer a brilliant, practical blueprint to save Web3 from itself. It's all about shifting our focus from simply building cool technology to carefully, intentionally designing the institutions that govern that technology. Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize-winning principles actually prove that shared resources do not have to end in tragedy. But for decentralized DAOs, or data cooperatives, to survive without collapsing into a total oligarchy, they absolutely need these specific, actionable community safeguards built right into their design. Notice things on this list like transparent monitoring and conflict resolution arenas. Yeah, those are elements that are almost completely missing in most early Web3 projects. And then we have Karl Polanyi. He teaches us that we simply cannot rely on trustless algorithmic enforcement alone. Markets are never just self-regulating in a vacuum. We have to actively embed social safeguards, labor protections, and public value directly into the Web3 ecosystem. Actually, if we don't, these permissionless designs will just commodify participation and essentially roll out the red carpet for elite capture. Part 5. Designing True Democratic Resilience. Let's dive into the final actionable takeaways to bridge this massive gap between the law and the code. By following these 4 specific design steps, developers can build systems that actually work for everyone. First, we need accountability by design, like actual, real fiduciary duties for token delegates. Second, capability formation. That means actively funding digital literacy so everyday people can actually participate. Third is polycentric nesting, which is creating shared standards to resolve disputes. And fourth, cooperative infrastructures to give nominal tokens actual usable real-world value. This is how decentralized technology finally translates into real social inclusion and democratic resilience. As you leave this explainer today, I really want you to consider this provocative challenge. We built the distributed ledger. We have literally accomplished the technological moon landing of our time. But achieving technical brilliance means absolutely nothing if we can't design the human institutions required to distribute its power fairly. So, the question remains, will we govern the ghetto, or are we just going to recreate it on the blockchain? Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning the code.